You know that feeling when you dive into the vast world of Anki, feeling like you can conquer any subject under the sun? It's pretty mesmerising, right? In the greater scheme of things, sure, the world is your oyster, but you need to be realistic in your goals and how you approach them. Today I'll share with you 7 pitfalls to avoid when using Anki. Whether it's because you could use your time more wisely, or because Anki might not be the best fit for your goals. I got you. So let's take a look at what not to do. So firstly, let's talk about mnemonics and why we shouldn't neglect them. What's a mnemonic? Well, the Oxford Dictionary defines it as the study and development of systems for improving and assisting the memory. But because I don't want you to click off the video, I'll just give you a personal example. I could never make out my left and right until someone told me to create L shapes with both my hands. Which one creates the correct L shape? The one on the left. Now, would I get the desired effect if every single time I choose the wrong one, someone slaps me in the face? Sure, but offering that a visual aid can give your brain more ways to connect and submit the information. Visual learners would benefit greatly. Another example of a mnemonic is the order of operations in maths, which can be shortened BIDMAS in the UK and PEDMAS in the US. Rather than having to memorise each operation, you just remember the acronym and your brain will know to unpack it much easier. You can do the same thing for all the colours in the rainbow or all the planets in the solar system. So a point here is, just because spaced repetition can automate your education to an extent, you should still use all the tools available. Unless you change the setting manually, Anki will begin to delete cards if you get them wrong so many times. Next up, I think we should talk about why you shouldn't cram too much stuff onto one flashcard in Anki. I assume you've used Anki if you're watching this video, but if you haven't, it's like trying to fit a whole book onto a sticky note. It just doesn't work well. The whole reason we're able to make so many cards in a deck is so that you only have to focus on one question at a time. And while it can be encouraged to add a little more context underneath each answer, you should only treat it as a bonus and not something you select again for if you don't remember. Additionally, you may find it so taxing that you can't be bothered studying the rest of the deck. I found that as a good rule of thumb, you want to make sure you can understand the question being asked within a few seconds. So, keep your cards simple and focused. Break down big ideas into smaller chunks that are easier to swallow. That way, your brain can digest the information better and you'll actually remember it when you need to. Though speaking of spreading out your learning material, there is the point of over-reliance. While Anki is an amazing tool that can make some wicked interactive cards, there are points where it'll be impossible to put what you've learned into practice without stepping away from the software and just doing it. I wouldn't really recommend putting recipes into Anki unless you really don't have anything better to learn, just because you can always take a shopping list with you to the shop and then watch how to do it on YouTube later. But Anki can't prepare and cook the food for you. Even if you do know how to make the perfect meatloaf without looking, practice and experience is still required to solidify how to do it. I'm sure I've said before in one of my videos, but programming is the same. You could theoretically know how to program an emulator without looking, but if you woke up one day with a bad hangover and a career in software engineering, you'll probably find yourself looking up how to do whatever it is you've been asked to do in the first place. My point isn't that there are references on the internet for how to cook meatloaf and program a CPU, but if you were employed by someone to do it with a strict deadline, you'd be looking up videos and following them. Similarly, we can talk about physical skills and movement. I'm sure this is plain obvious to a lot of you watching this, but while Anki is a fantastic tool for learning factual information, there isn't much it can do to provide feedback on something physical. Whether it's learning to play a musical instrument, perfecting a dance routine, or mastering a new sport, these endeavours require more than just rote memorisation. They demand practice, feedback, and hands-on experience. There's nothing to stop you from gamifying the process in a way that feels similar to using Anki. And by that I mean, find a system that can offer you points and a way to reward yourself for hitting certain milestones. As far as this thing goes though, Anki can't replicate the feeling of holding a guitar, executing a dance step, or perfecting a golf swing. Now remember when I said that overloading a single card can be counterintuitive? Well, you could say the same for using Anki to try and learn a speech. It is something you can do, but it would be very time consuming and there are better ways you can manage what you're trying to do. If you're giving a TED talk, telling embarrassing stories about the groom at a wedding, or telling great stories about him at his funeral, you're better off using written notes to trigger those memories. This also goes back to actually practicing what you've learned as well, as actively speaking for long periods can be a little draining and it can be difficult to pronounce everything. At least it is for dyspraxic like me. The muscles in your mouth don't always work and it's really irritating. What are some other alternatives apart from using written notes that act as a reminder in the middle of a speech? Well, something I've done for my YouTube scripts is use a Chrome extension called SpeakIt to read out parts of the script over and over again until it stays in my head long enough for me to read it out loud without having to look at it. I'll try and make sure that block of words is read before a comma or a full stop so it doesn't sound weird. Something you can also do is use a teleprompter so that you don't even have to hold anything in memory, coupled with a piece of software that can correct eye contact, as that's something AI can do now. When it comes to scripting a conversation between two people though, I suppose you could use Anki and have questions like, what's the correct way to respond to X and Y? But I would still go through the script from top to bottom. Another thing with scripts is that Anki will always insist that you learn cards in the order that you remember the least, and that's a good thing, else you would begin to stumble when asked things out of order. Anki is a very powerful tool and is great at making sure you remember everything at the same level, but sometimes you want things to flow chronologically, and that's why you always see people following notes or bullet points. The last thing I want to cover isn't so much something to avoid doing completely, but more of a cautionary thing, stuff to make sure you're aware of. So to go back to the previous example of learning a script in Anki, you need to make sure you're understanding the context of whatever it is you're talking about, else you'll just forget it. You might remember a time when you were in class. You could remember small blocks of what he or she was talking about, but it only became much clearer when you looked into the subject matter a little more. Personally, if I don't understand the context of what I'm talking about, it's much harder to learn anything else. Here's another example, and it's probably a good reason you shouldn't make your programming decks too big. If you were to look at a piece of code in isolation, it might not make sense for a variety of reasons. You've got variables you've set yourself, and you've got functions that are only applicable to the module you're using. If you see a variable called zeroValue or a function called divide_by_0, you don't know if those functions predefined in Python or defined by the user. I've also made the mistake in the past of adding blocks of Python code that I didn't fully comprehend, thinking that it didn't matter as long as I knew it worked. I mean, what's the point trying to memorize this when you can instead learn how to cook meatloaf? Something I've been wanting to try for a while now. Maybe I'll try it and let you know in the community tab. I don't know. Make your own flashcards. Don't grab anyone else's in a pinch or copy-paste sentences directly from reference text. By tailoring the content to your own learning style and preferences, you ensure that your study sessions are more effective and efficient. So, resist the urge to take shortcuts and invest in your learning by creating your own Anki cards from scratch. But that'll be my advice for this video. Hopefully you can take these words of advice to heart when creating your learning schedule. As always, if you enjoyed what I had to say today, I'd very much appreciate a like and subscribe, and don't forget to tick that notification bell. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful week, and thanks for watching. Bye now.